Memoir we talked to Lotta about today is called Mrs. D is Going Within. Lotta discovered that her lifelong heavy drinking had left her as a fledgling emotionally, with bouts of niggling, anxiety and unease. So here's Lotta to tell us what going within really means. Welcome, Lotta, back to Take It From Us.
Hi, great to be here.
I wonder what sort of symptoms of dis-ease or anxiety were you experiencing? Well, I suppose it's you've written this book. It's probably nearly 12 months ago that these symptoms started to arrive, or even earlier, perhaps.
Yeah, I probably started noticing about 2 or 3 years after I quit drinking. Initially when I took alcohol out of my life, that was so much of a focus for me, and just learning how to not drink, it really dominated my experience. And after about 2 or 3 years of being sober, when sober became ordinary, which is a wonderful thing, right? I wasn't fighting to not drink every day. I just didn't drink, and that was my norm. That was great. But then what I started noticing was this other stuff that was going on for me. And, when you're sober all the time and raw, there's really no escaping how you're feeling. And I just wasn't feeling great. And I feel almost bad admitting that, because I always want to promote being sober, because it is amazing and I love it, and it's so much better than being boozy. But the truth is, when you take alcohol away, you really discover what's underneath. And for me, yeah, there was definitely, I'd call it a low-grade anxiety. I'd often find myself almost with a nervous tummy, like something was wrong, and I'd be thinking, why am I nervous? Have I got something to do later today, or have I just received an email I'm worried about? And I'd sort of try and figure out, and often there wasn't anything specific. I just felt edgy, and I started realizing I needed to do something about that.
Did you feel that your mental health was, threatened or impacted?
Yeah, well, yes, because I felt, uncomfortable. I wasn't just cruising through my days. I was fraught, and I had this, physical sensation of nerves and butterflies in my tummy, tightening in my chest. I mean, all of that is your mental health, isn't it? I mean, I don't want to over-exaggerate it, because in general I don't suffer from any major anxiety or depression or anything like that. I mean, I don't. But I have a low-grade sense often of being just wound up, and I was just, like I say, I became very aware of that because I was sober, number one, and number two, I wasn't putting so much energy into not drinking. So I just found I got to a point where it was like, I need to do some further work on myself, Do you think that this, we described in the introduction that you sort of may have discovered that you were emotionally a fledgling, if you like, that was the impact of the alcohol, and you had to grow up emotionally? Is that accurate? Yeah, and, what was also happening as I spent more time being sober is that things were happening in my life that were hard. I had my beloved stepfather died. That was terrible grief. Stresses through work, just stuff happening around me. And as those things occurred, especially the big things, I just really realized I was very ill-equipped to deal with them. I had no strategies of, my go-to strategy had always been to have a drink. I mean, that's what I did. I always had a wine, and that is a strategy. It's not a particularly healthy one, but it worked for me for 20-plus years until I stopped drinking. And so, yeah, I just found I was ill-equipped emotionally to manage myself through these difficult things. And that's why I got to this point where I was like, I need to do some more work. I'm struggling here. I'm floundering around. I'm sober, and that's great. But now I need to do some more work.
Yeah, I mean, I've read the book, Mrs. D is Going Within, and there's occasions when I read pages where I almost thought that you were tempted to go back to the drink.
No, I don't think I've ever been properly tempted to go back to drink. I really don't, to be honest with you. I think I love having alcohol out of my life. I look at alcohol now as just this stupid, substance. I understand why so many of us drink because it does work, but it's so destructive and dysfunctional, really, as a coping mechanism, and I feel quite detached from it. I'm happy to have it out of my life. I don't want to go back to where I was at all. But I did have other coping mechanisms that were unhealthy, particularly food, sugar and flour.
Flour?
I can be very alcoholic in my relation to those foods.
Oh,
yeah.
Flour?
And I've just been reading a book, a really interesting book about the brain, which sets out, very clearly the science behind the fact that flour and sugar impact on the brain in the same way as alcohol and cocaine, because they've been so refined down from their original
product
state.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can crave ciabatta rolls and have 3 in a sitting. I mean, we're not talking about healthy food. We're talking about quite alcoholic behaviours.
Right.
And this was the other thing I was noticing, along with my discomfort and butterflies and tightening in my chest and, feeling a bit anxious, was also that I was really reaching for and acting in the same way as I was when I was drinking with these foods and having the same guilt and the same cravings. And I just was really stuck and needed to
Did you classify those as addictions, do you think, or...
I'm still working on it now, and when I wrote this last book, I was binging on sugary, floury foods throughout, I have to be honest.
To get you through to meet the deadline of producing the memoir.
Exactly. I mean, how ironic is that? Here I was writing about how I'm working on my mental health, and I was still acting at the same time in a very unhealthy way. But I'm honest about that in the book. I mean, I'm always honest about it because I never want to purport to be this perfect example of how to sort yourself out. But
I think you're exceedingly honest in this book, and that's one of the wonderful aspects of it. How about your self-esteem and self-image? I guess while you were writing this memoir, Mrs. D is Going Within, but also, I guess, on your, I suppose you'd call it a path to self-discovery, to discovering strategies and wellness tools that were going to help this unease that you had.
Yeah, I mean, I exposed myself very greatly in the book, and that was uncomfortable for me to write and to put out. And I don't know why I'm driven to be so honest, but I am, and so there was this one part of me that was driven to kind of be brutally honest and write it out, and I was doing that, but at the same time, I was feeling very exposed and raw and vulnerable about that and coping with those feelings by having unhealthy behaviours, self-sabotaging behaviours.
Right, but isn't honesty the only really effective approach to wellness?
Yeah, I do believe so, absolutely. And even just talking honestly now, it always helps me, and I think people obviously relate to that. But there is I'd be lying if I didn't say I pay a price, because I can be left feeling very vulnerable, and when I feel that kind of strong emotion, I self-sabotage. This is what I still need to work on, is not moving to behaviours that are self-sabotaging when I'm feeling very uncomfortable in my own skin. I mean, and it sounds funny because no one made me write this book, right? I mean, it was my choice.
Well, you'd written one with the title Mrs. D is Going Without, and once you adopted some of these strategies that we're going to talk about, it was natural, surely, to write what do you call it,
a follow-up.
A follow-up, a second in the series, yes. Well, let's get on to some of those strategies that, you played around with a little bit, didn't you? And then suddenly you started to realise the benefits. What were some of those strategies that you relate to in the heading of this book or the title of the book about going within yourself?
Well, I'd been hearing, I spend a bit of time on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and I kept hearing all these other wellness people talking about things like yoga and gratitude and mindfulness. And to be honest with you, I'd always been very resistant. I thought it was wishy-washy, claptrap, monks on mountaintops, not for me. But I got to this point where I was feeling so uncomfortable. I knew I was having these other unhealthy behaviours around food. And so I just thought, right, I'm going to try these things. Bugger it, let's just see. What are they? How do they work in practical terms? Because I'm always very practical. Like, I want, practically speaking, how's this going to impact on my days? I'm going to research them, basically. And so I set about. And as you know, if you've read the book, there was a lot of trial and error. I would try different kind of meditation teachers like Deepak Chopra, or, I'd go to a yoga class and I'd hate it. There was a lot of and thankfully I didn't give up. And one of the things I really hope that people do get out of the book is, the sense that if you try one or two things and they don't work, don't give up. There's so much available out there, different classes you can go to, different people you can listen to online. Keep going until you find the ones that fit with you. And eventually I did. And I did, after 3 goes, found the yoga class that worked for me. And now I've gone from hating yoga to absolutely loving it. I mean, last night I was really stressed and grumpy, and I went to my yoga class. Yeah. And when I came out of it, I felt more relaxed and positive. I mean, it was that tangible in 1 hour from doing yoga. I don't know, why exactly, but it works.
Well, and it's wonderful to get that reward from just an hour's effort, isn't it? I do what's called a Sunday Restore yoga session once a month, and that's actually 2.5 hours, and it's not about standing on your head or doing anything sort of athletic. It's very much about just relaxing into a pose, which normally is lying down and putting your thigh and your leg on a support and then breathing. And I come out of there, I do come out absolutely zen-like.
I know.
And then I get back into Auckland's traffic, and by the time I get home...
Well, that's the thing. Life keeps going on. And the other big thing that I researched is mindfulness. And just really it unlocked for me this real understanding of my brain and my thought patterns and how it works and how lost I get in my thinking. And just having the ability to identify what you're doing. And with something like yoga, it just forces you to break out of those patterns for a while, which can be so relaxing because we spend a lot of time thinking, don't we?
Well, we do, and it's managing that thinking. And I think mindfulness is a brilliant tool, wellness tool. But you really, I think, would it be fair to say that you got a bit lucky with mindfulness? You went online and you were very impressed with a couple of practitioners.
Yeah, I tried Deepak Chopra and Oprah's website. That didn't work for me. And then I tried an app called Headspace, which is hugely popular, but it wasn't right for me. And then I stumbled upon a book, which someone I think recommended to me through my blog. And I got it out of the library. And then and it was an 8-week plan. So quite early on, I stumbled onto this book and I followed their plan to the letter for 8 weeks. And that really unlocked it for me. Only by really forcing myself to do it for the 8 weeks every day, as instructed, did I start actually understanding what the concepts were and what impact they could have, practically speaking, on my days.
Well, you had a few challenges, though, with 3 boys, is it, under 12, and busy household, and having to get up and surreptitiously sort of lean against the sofa.
Well, that's right. but, the main thing I think to realise with mindfulness is it's very subtle and it's very slow burning. And, and for someone like me who's an alcoholic, who's used to kind of quick, fast, let's just fix this or let's just, make it hard and fast, to have to kind of slow yourself and get into it and then slowly start to see the benefits. It's a real adjustment. But once, I'd made that adjustment I started seeing these little impacts, that I really start getting it. And, I'm still a huge work in progress, really, still got a long way to go. But the fact that I've got the concepts now and I can use it, and sometimes I need to use it more than others.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And we're talking to Lotta Dann, who I think we can rightfully describe as an author and writer, but also a blogger and somebody that knows a lot about the gains of becoming sober and sobriety. That's a fair description, Lotta?
Yes. That is a fair description.
Right. Well, we were talking about the slow burn effect of mindfulness, and I guess in my practice of mindfulness, as I do it more regularly, then the benefits become, I guess, more clear-cut.
Yeah, and I think the word regularly is the key here, and the word practice, because it's not something you read a book and then you get it and then you have it. It is something you need to practice daily if you can, because then you can start changing the patterns of your mind. And it's, I think I've said this to you before, but it's quite hard to articulate. You can describe what it is and you can hear someone describe it, but until you start actually doing it yourself, and seeing the little subtle difference it can make to your whole experience of life, then you can really appreciate. If anyone's listening who hasn't tried it, I heartily recommend you give it a go for a week, say, where you find a book or a podcast and you just try and practice it, and you'll slowly start to see that you have this ability to recognise what you're thinking about and just disengage from the thoughts, even just for a second. Thank you, brain, for worrying about that email. Now, if you don't mind, I'm just going to feel the water on my hands as I wash these dishes. It sounds like nothing, but if you just do that occasionally, you start to disengage and not get so caught up in thinking, which can lead us to all manner of, disease.
Well, put simply, with that example where you just focus on the water on your hands as you do the dishes, you're living in the present, aren't you? You're focusing on the thing that you are doing, and mindfulness is often, recommends that that's how we live our life.
Yeah, and because, difficult things happen, right? Emails are sent that are concerning and worrying. So you get the email, it's concerning and worrying. You have to deal with it. Now, you feel some disease when you get the email, right? But if you spend the next 3 or 4 hours worrying and fretting and thinking about that email, then it's really bled into your day hugely, right? And then you have to reply to the email. So you can choose whether or not to spend those 3 or 4 hours in between receiving and then replying to the email. You can choose whether or not you spend all of that time being very sort of tightly wound thinking about it, or whether you can try and have snatches of time within that where you don't. And if you can do the latter and break out of the worry, it creates a more calm experience, and it makes you better in a better state to actually deal with it when you need to. Does that make sense? I'm sorry, I feel like that was a bit convoluted.
Well, it certainly makes sense to me, but you have admitted that there's a sort of fairly significant development which is stressing you out right at the moment. Without necessarily going into the detail of that, how is your mindfulness helping you through this?
Yeah, so right now I'm in the middle of what I would describe as quite a difficult situation for me, and it's an emotional situation. It's not something I have a lot of control over. I'm trying to manage my way through it as best I can, but it's stressing me out. It is, and I'm aware of the fact that I am thinking about it a lot. I'm creating imaginary conversations in my mind with people that don't even they're not even aware they're fighting with me in my mind. I'm creating the fight.
Right.
And
God, they're a bloody nuisance, those imaginary conversations, aren't they?
Yeah, so this is a really difficult situation for me. It's quite extreme. And now that I'm aware of, I've got mindfulness as a tool, I'm aware of how it works, I'm very aware of how my mind works, I can see, it's almost like I've got a little observer standing back who can see me being fixated on this. And that little observer in my mind is just pulling me up constantly. You stop thinking about this now. You're having a shower. Think about the shower. Stop, worrying about this now. You're cooking dinner. Think about the mince. I mean, again, it sounds like nothing much, but I think it is helping me, definitely, this mindfulness, because I'm just able to have moments where I'm relaxing myself. And because I've been practicing for a while now, every time I think to myself, like, for example, in the shower this morning, there I was, locked in another imaginary fight or discussion with someone. I recognised what I was doing. I literally made myself stop and focus on the soap, which is a nice new soap I bought from a fancy store. And it worked for a moment there. I could feel myself just relax and go, oh, look, I'm in a lovely hot shower with a nice soap.
Yeah, well,
just a little moment like that can have an overall impact on me.
Those imaginary conversations would happen when I woke up in the middle of the night, and if I was frustrated by somebody, perhaps at work, I'd, almost draft a letter in my head. I've adopted a little saying now that just says focus on the now and relax. And I say that to myself in bed, breathe in, focus on the now, and breathe out, just saying relax. And inevitably I will go back to sleep. And, I wake up 7 o'clock in the morning and I think to myself, boy, that strategy, that little tactic really works well.
Isn't that lovely? Because after a while of practicing like this, that part of your brain that's fretting and worrying does lose some of its power, because you're just seeing it for what it is, and it's disempowering it slightly. And
well,
it's really important.
It is about living in the now, I think, and I've been to mindfulness workshops, and people have said, well, when do you do your planning? And, that's a dilemma that I had faced, and people say to me, well, if you live in the now, you've got to be able to plan. Anyway, this mindfulness facilitator said, well, he allocates between 5:30 and 6:30 each day to do his planning. And I thought, well, that's a pretty sensible way of going about it.
Yeah, that sounds very good. If you can compartmentalise like that, fantastic.
Yeah. So you did say that you were a bit stressed about this issue. You've got a lack of control. How do you think, what tactics or strategies will you adopt to counter this stress?
I've got a few, really, that I'm applying. I mean, I'm really trying to work really hard on managing this one. One of the big sort of concepts of mindfulness is acceptance and not wasting energy wishing things were different than what they actually are. So I'm really just working on trying to accept this is the situation. Now how do I manage it, rather than I wish it wasn't like this. That's just a waste of energy. So acceptance. I am, it sounds cliche, but I'm also really trying to look for the positives in it, because there are positives in it. So that's a kind of a gratitude attitude, I suppose, but just trying to make sure that I keep reminding myself these are the positive things about what's happening, because they are there, right? It's not all negative.
How much... sorry.
Yeah, and also just telling myself, the only constant is change. Nothing ever stays the same, ever. So, this, in a sense, this is inevitable. Everything changes all the time. So all of those things to try and help myself roll with it, rather than harden and tighten and fight it.
But, I mean, you've made a lot of changes, haven't you? I mean, there is a saying, if we always do what we've always done, we'll always get what we always got. And, you know, I think...
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I use it at my wellness classes that I facilitate. And I think it really underlines a critical message. So you've made a lot of changes, and it sounds as though, you know, you're on the road to, well, self-discovery and practicing things a little bit differently.
Yeah, and also trying to forgive myself when I make mistakes, because I still do make mistakes and I get things wrong, and my interpretation isn't you know, necessarily the accurate view. And so forgiveness as well, forgiving myself as well, and just accepting myself with my flaws is another big one. I mean, you know, it's hard being a human. It really is. We're all trying to do the best we can.
But, I mean, this approach of more mindfulness and your yoga practice, isn't this about being kinder to ourselves? I mean, being grateful as well?
Yes, absolutely it is. And just looking for the good, positive things and having an understanding of what we need, you know, to balance our lives out.